What the hell happened to the internet? Everyone is such a pussy now. Don't get me wrong, I'm a bigger pussy than most of the general population of the world, but that's only when it comes to outside the internet. But my god, at least I don't get triggered by food, so much so that someone even mentioning it requires a trigger warning. This is a look into the current state of the internet. As long as I've been alive, there have always been sensitive content warnings on all different types of media that I've consumed. The most common type is the viewer discretion is advised announcement at the beginning of a TV show, or in the movie theater when the letter rating of the movie you're about to watch is displayed prominently on screen before the movie begins, along with the types of content that some viewers may find disturbing within this movie. These types of warnings were put into place to protect children from content that might traumatize them, as well as warn parents about what type of content is about to happen. Even from a young age, I thought that these warnings were kind of silly, because who the hell actually listens to them? Like, seriously. My parents let me watch rated R movies and play rated M video games long before I was 17, and so did most of my friends' parents. But there was always that one or two kids whose parents never let them watch anything higher than a PG-13 movie, or play video games rated higher than T for teen. Now, I'm no psychologist, all right? But I've noticed that the kids whose parents enforce these rating systems always end up a little bit fricked up, right? You all know it's true, and if you say I'm being offensive or whatever, then you're probably the type whose parents heavily enforced these rating systems on you. And you didn't get to watch the same movies as all your friends did, or play the same games that all your friends did. You missed out. You were sheltered. Either that, or you're trying to be morally superior, even though you secretly know that it's true and you agree with me, but you'd never agree with Pkrussl on the internet, right? That aside, at least this rating system has good intentions, and it was created as an attempt to solve a real problem, which is kids watching and playing things that they should not be watching or playing. But these warnings also play a part in warning adults about what they're about to watch. For example, veterans may rely on these systems along with descriptions of what happens in the movie to determine whether or not they'd be at risk of having a PTSD trigger occur while watching a movie in a public, crowded theater. They might read that a movie contains loud, sudden noises, explosions, so on and so forth, and that might potentially trigger a PTSD, what is it called? The PTSD attack? I'm not quite sure what it's called. I don't know. I've always thought that these warning systems were silly, even in cases like this, and they're a little bit overstretched. Obviously, you don't want to take a 5-year-old to see a rated R movie. It will traumatize them, but if you need a warning label to tell you that, then maybe you aren't fit to be a parent, because that should just be common sense. On the other hand, keeping your 16-year-old kid from his friend's house because you know they're all gonna watch a rated R movie is a bit ridiculous. And if you're an adult who finds certain things disturbing, or if you have PTSD, or there's another situation in your life that requires you to know what's gonna happen in a movie before watching it, all it takes is reading the description of a movie to know exactly what's gonna happen. It's rare to see a movie without having any idea what the movie is about beforehand. And if you need to know, you just Google a brief description of it. I feel like it's still common sense, you know? You don't go see a movie about war if you have PTSD from war. I don't know. I kind of think that a lot of the really weird parents who'd like to shelter their kids way too much, they abuse this system and they really, really heavily enforce it to keep their friends from seeing all the same movies that all their friends are seeing. That's usually what happens with these systems, rather than any actual useful use case that you can have with these systems. It's more so abused than used properly. Now, of course, there are some warning systems that have much more useful use cases, such as epilepsy warning systems. If you're watching a YouTube video and someone says, oh, hey, epilepsy warning, there's about to be flashing images on your screen. This is way more important because that can prevent you from going to the hospital. You all probably know about the Porygon episode of the Pokemon anime, how it sent tens or hundreds of kids, I forget the exact number of how many, to the emergency room because they had epilepsy attacks, because there was no epilepsy warning for that episode, and there should have been. This is quite literally one of the most important trigger warnings that we have, because it can prevent people from going to the hospital. And of course, we have warnings for adult inappropriate image websites. You know what I'm talking about. They require you to confirm that you are 18 or older, and they're like, this website contains explicit imagery. You all know what I'm talking about. You've all been there. We've all been there. If you haven't been there, you're lying about it. This is less to warn people about what they're gonna see, because let's be real, you all know what you're gonna see if you go to a website like this. It's more to cover their asses if you're not actually 18, because you're agreeing to being 18. So it's not like they have any way of knowing. They're not gonna ask everyone who enters the website for their ID, you know what I mean? Although in some places that is actually happening right now. It's less of a warning and more so to cover their asses legally speaking, because it didn't stop me from going to those websites when I was under 18, and it certainly didn't stop you either. The person watching this video, I know what you did, don't lie to me, but you all came here to see me talk about one thing and one thing only. And that's trigger warnings. This is the modern day iteration of viewer discretion is advised. It applies to content on social media like tweets, so on and so forth. The topic of trigger warnings has been extremely controversial for over a decade, almost 14 years. According to BuzzFeed, if anyone's an expert on trigger warnings, it's BuzzFeed. Feminist, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's a feminist blog, officially introduced trigger warnings in 2008. Trigger warnings were first created with the intention of warning readers about potentially traumatizing content, such as sexual violence, so on and so forth. So how did we end up here? After seeing a recent rise in the use of trigger warnings and content warnings for even the most mundane of things that we do daily, like eating food, every single person on Earth experiences this almost daily, depends on where you live. People are even starting to content warning all caps on a Twitter post, which again is something that most of us experience all the time. When you live in this version of the internet where people are doing stuff like this, it's hard to remember back in the day when the internet was originally torn about trigger warnings in the 2012 to 2017 era of the internet. But my God, were they torn. This was when the term SJW was still widely used, when feminist cringe compilations were popular on YouTube, you name it. Both the social justice craze and the anti-social justice craze were in full swing at this time. And this was also when trigger warnings were usually used for actual traumatizing events. They were used with their original intention. They weren't used for things like food and for all caps. But anti-SJWs back then argued that trigger warnings were bad. First of all, the point of a trigger warning is to protect you from hearing about a tragic event. An event that could potentially trigger you. So isn't reading trigger warning sexual assault gonna make you think of it anyways? Because you just read about it. Secondly, people argued that all this was just part of life. These things happen. And while they may be unpleasant and uncomfortable, refusing to talk about them at all, or even acknowledge them in any way, it does nothing to help. The only way to solve these problems is by talking about them and coming up with solutions, not just pretending like they don't exist and never talking about them. These are uncomfortable realities that need to be talked about for progress to be made. But on the other hand, social justice activists, or SJWs, argued that while compared to the general population, few people experienced traumatizing situations like these people still need to be protected from reading about similar situations, which may remind them of the trauma they've experienced, and that it's completely unnecessary to needlessly expose people to uncomfortable situations if they don't want to be exposed to them, especially due to past experiences. Personally, I see where both sides are coming from, and both sides do make sense. It's kind of like the warning systems we talked about earlier for movies and for TV shows and video games and so on and so forth. I think they don't really provide that much protection at all against whatever you're about to read, but on the other hand, they're very easy to ignore and to look over. Seeing the rated R splash screen pop up on a movie before I watch it doesn't keep me from watching the movie. I almost don't even notice it. It's very easy to ignore it if I don't care about it. If trigger warnings make people more comfortable, then there's no harm in it for me to have to read a trigger warning before a post. However, I'm not a sexual assault survivor, so I don't know what it's like. I can't even begin to insinuate that I understand what it's like to have lived through something like that, but I can't imagine being able to safely even use the internet at all after something like that, if the mere mention of it triggers me to the point where trigger warnings are required. Even if everything about that topic had trigger warnings, just reading the trigger warning would make me immediately think back on my own experience with that topic. It's like if you've ever been in a car accident, even a minor one, every time someone talks about a car accident, you always think about the time you were in a car accident in your head, and you picture it in your head. I don't really understand how trigger warnings protect against being triggered when it literally brings up and mentions the exact thing that would trigger you if you just read the post normally. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm dumb. If trigger warnings do work for you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. I'd love to know your experience. But again, for serious topics like this, trigger warnings have absolutely zero negative effect on me reading them. So I don't mind them being there, but I can't imagine them being very helpful, and they seem rather silly to me. Now, one place where I think trigger warnings are much more helpful are for pictures and videos. When you read something triggering, all you can do is imagine it, but when you actually see it happen, obviously that'll have a much more profound effect. What do you think about trigger warnings for serious topics? Do you think they're helpful or not? Let me know in the comments. But now we move on to the new age of trigger warnings, content warnings for food, for all caps, so on and so forth. What the hell, man? How did we get to this point? Why would mentioning food trigger someone? You eat it 3 times a day, depending on where you live. We're gonna talk about all that and more right after a word from our sponsor. And that's me, my Patreon. Go check out my Patreon. Link is in the description down below. All it costs you is $2 a month minimum, and you get access to all my videos early. Your support makes it possible to do all of this. Without your help, none of this would be possible. All the patrons are on your screen right now. All of them are just amazing people. I love all of you so much. You're all amazing. Thank you for being lovely patrons. You all allow me to do what I want to do for a living, and I can never repay you for that. Thank you, patrons. And it's not just patrons who help out, it's the channel members as well. They're all on your screen. What's a channel member? Well, if you go down, scroll down, see that subscribe button there. First of all, click on the subscribe button, okay? But right next to it, you'll see that join button. If you click on that, you can become a $5 patron basically directly through YouTube without going to patreon.com. So that's another way to support the channel. Great way to do it. YouTube takes 30% of that, but you know, I'll take what I can get, right? Thank you to all the lovely channel members on your screen. They help out just as much as patrons do, and they also get access to all my videos early as well. Back to the video. So why are there now trigger warnings for things like food in all caps in a tweet? Well, I think it's all just a natural evolution of the original trigger warnings that we all know and love. They used to focus on serious events that could trigger people with certain conditions or could trigger people who have experienced certain events in the past. These people have all the right intentions. They noticed that trigger warnings were intended to protect people, so they thought, hey, if I mention food, it could potentially trigger someone who suffers from an eating disorder. Therefore, I should put trigger warnings when I talk about food. The logic does make sense and the intentions are good. And the same goes with the trigger warning for all caps in a tweet. Maybe they dated an abusive person who would sometimes send nasty, emotionally abusive texts and they were always all in caps. And now reading anything in all caps reminds them of that. While these people have good intentions, it's really stupid. Oh my God. You can't trigger warning food. Everyone eats food. It's not possible. What, you expect to drive by restaurants on the street and have them say trigger warning McDonald's? Like, what the hell? What if you need to go to the grocery store to shop for the food that you have to eat to stay alive? You cannot trigger warning something that you have to eat to stay alive. Every single living being on this planet has to eat something to stay alive. Not just humans, but everything. Plants, animals, everything. And it's not just once daily. Most animals eat multiple times a day, including humans who eat usually 3 times a day. No eating disorder is going to change the fact that you still have to eat to survive. So if food is triggering you because you have an eating disorder, then every time you eat food, you're going to be triggering yourself regardless. At least the old trigger warnings made a little bit more sense, you know? They were there to protect people from reading about events that are traumatizing, that are truly traumatizing. But Parker, eating food might be traumatizing to some people. Yes, I'm sure that it is. I'm sure for people with certain eating disorders that talking about food is traumatizing. That really sucks, and I feel bad for them, and no one should have to go through that. But that's not my problem. If so much as reading someone talk about the dinner that they ate is enough to trigger you, you need to seek professional help. We should not be required to put a trigger warning to anything we ever post referring to food because it's such a common thing to talk about. It is not on us to protect you from your feelings about food. It is on you to get professional help for your feelings so that you can be integrated properly in society. You have to be able to talk about food. We might as well trigger warning drinking water, or if you take a selfie at the mall, make sure you put trigger warning / stores. You know, oh no, there's stores around. Like, what the hell? This is ridiculous. Trigger warnings for serious events, they're arguable, but they serve an actual purpose that is legitimate and real and makes sense. Trigger warnings for food is just ridiculous. And if you disagree, then I'm triggered. There has to be a line drawn somewhere, but who gets to decide where that line is drawn? We can't trigger warning everything in existence, but some things do need to be trigger warning, like beheading videos. I think should have a trigger warning, don't you think so? So where's the line drawn? I don't know how we properly work that out. That's the problem with stuff like this. There's no clear definition as to where the line is drawn and who gets to draw the line. I always think about how these people would react if they were thrown into a Call of Duty Modern Warfare lobby, you know, back in 2009. I'm not saying that things should go back to how they were back then. There was too much toxicity back then, but at least you could talk about what you had for dinner without triggering someone, right? The internet used to be such a free place. You used to be able to share your own opinions without worrying about the Twitter mob coming for you. You used to be able to use capital letters in words without frightening someone. You never had to worry about conformity. You were encouraged to be different. But with that level of freedom came a great level of toxicity. For example, the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 lobbies from back in the day, right? But was the trade-off for less toxicity and more conformity, was that worth it? I'd argue that it's absolutely not worth it. Because now we have a different type of toxicity on the internet, such as, you know, cancel culture, censorship, trigger warnings for talking about what you had for dinner, there's demonetization, there's shadow banning, there's so many problems on the internet now that never used to exist. And the trade-off, I don't think it was worth it. The old internet really taught you to have a thick skin. And if you could learn how to have a thick skin, you can have a great time on the internet. The current internet gets scared of fettuccine alfredo. What happened, guys? I mean, come on. What the hell happened, man? I even took it upon myself to ask you all on Twitter and Discord, both of which there's a link to in my description for my Twitter and my Discord. You can join the Discord for free. You can follow my Twitter for free. I asked you what you all thought about this as well, and it's interesting to see what you all said. Foot Lettuce says, it's just annoying and dumb. I've even seen one where the person who is mad is getting into fights with other people because the video doesn't have a trigger warning of Tyler 1 League of Legends player shouting. It's kind of annoying how these people think that just because they have this condition, they have the right to see some trigger warning for something so simple like a streamer getting mad, or in your example, food. It's kind of like how things normally are on the internet, except there's a weird or bad, probably more on the bad side of things. Jay-Z Creation says, to me, it can be unnecessary. I totally get trigger warnings for things like gore, but I feel like there's a point where things become unnecessary. But I suppose it's just a small warning to make sure others feel more comfortable, which is great. Gay says, content warnings or trigger warnings for stuff like caps or food is honestly dumb, to be honest. I would appreciate if it was used properly, like for flashing lights due to epilepsy, but people who are like trigger warning, insert harmless thing, are dumb. Bullrun Comics on Discord says, I have no idea why it's a thing. You chose to come onto a platform where everyone is free to discuss whatever they'd like, as long as it isn't there isn't any reason to have them. If you have a problem with seeing chicken legs, that isn't everyone else's problem. Snowy Haha says, for food and caps, absolutely dumb. People put a trigger warning or content warning for the littlest things. You can't always cater to everyone, and that's okay. It's just a small minority that don't enjoy those things, and putting a content warning for everything in your content is just ridiculous. Rain Katsun said, someone literally got mad on TikTok because they didn't put a content warning on bread cutting. Taya Bear Ow says, I feel like basic warning for gore is mostly a universal thing, but for things like mental illness, you need to take accountability for yourself. If you know something triggers you, then avoid it. Stay off apps or away from certain places. Not everyone knows what you're going through, so they can't be held responsible. And if you don't suffer from something that causes a trigger, don't ask for a trigger warning or content warning. Well, thank you all for watching. I truly appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to know what you think. Make sure you follow my Instagram. There's a link in the description down below. I post images there, like everyone else on the website. So make sure you go there for my images. Okay, that's it. Bye!